Good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. You see, I have this big smile on my face as I was watching that video. I'm like, yeah, thinking about all the ways that we can live well and how important that it is to live well. And actually also reflecting on our author tonight, because some of the things that she writes about in her book are some of the things that are some of the tenets of Live Well Sister. So thank you so much for being here. If this is your first time, I'm Marcie Thomas, the founder of Brown Girl Collective, and of course, Live Well Sister, which is a place where we come together to talk about different topics that impact our ability to live well, whether it's our finances or our relationships, our spiritual life, our self-care practices. All of those things play a role in our ability to live well. And so thank you for being here. If you're watching live, if you don't mind hopping in the comments to let us know you're here, if it's your first time, where you're joining us from, anything like that, just so this can be an interactive experience. I am actually coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, GA, which is where Kiara has lived at one point in time. So we were talking about that a little bit before we came on live. So tonight I am really excited to have her here with us, Kiara Imani, who actually was one of our winners last year. Last year I did the inaugural winner circle for BGC Book Club, and she actually had one of the top 3 memoirs, which is pretty exciting because she was in the, I'm going to show you real quick who her competition was, right? It was Viola Davis and Finding Me, and one and only Michelle Obama, The Light We Carry. So the fact that she was in the top 3 is pretty impressive. That means people have a lot of love for her story, for her memoir. And as I've had a chance to read it, I have that same love. So without further delay, let me go ahead and give you a little bit of brief introduction. Kiara Imani is an attorney, writer, and co-founder of Like You, a company creating products to help facilitate human connection and meaningful conversations. She is also on the board of the Associate Board of Directors for Free Wheelchair Mission, a nonprofit organization providing wheelchairs for people with disabilities in developing nations, and on the board of directors for Women in Toys, a nonprofit organization that champions and advocates for women in the toy industry. But recently, just a few weeks ago, she became a new boy mom of River Rain, and she is also the mompreneur behind the blog Diapers and Dollars, which talks a lot about her motherhood experience and being an entrepreneur. So without any further delay, welcome, Kiara Imani.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yes, and thank you so much. I know that was a lot of introduction, but you are so deserving.
Oh, okay.
I really do appreciate you and all of the work that you're doing. So, wow, like just to get it started. So just tell us a little bit about, your background. Some things, of course, are covered in the book, but just a little bit about who you are and what was it that brought you to the space of wanting to write Therapy Isn't Just for White People.
Yes, so I am an attorney by trade, been practicing almost 8 years now. I would describe myself as a very organized, type A, logical thinker, problem solver. I like to have a schedule, I like to have a plan, but as most of us probably know, simply from our lived experience, there are a lot of things in life you can't plan. And I'm always somebody that I would say has had a lot of anxiety. And I describe anxiety as just like a feeling of worry that won't go away or spirals. I think most people can relate to being worried or anxious at some point, but I've had more of like a generalized anxiety, meaning even if there's not something in particular that's causing the anxiety, I'll find things to be worried and anxious about. And it could be anything from, now obviously my fear is a little different being a boy mom. Like,
Right.
my kid's gonna have to go to school in 5 years, and what if there's a shooter, and then how am I gonna
Mm,
respond to that, and how am I gonna protect them, and then what if something happens, how would I deal with that, and would I feel guilty, and just things those types of thoughts that spiral out of control. And sometimes it could just be something as simple as I misplaced a book, and then, I'm stressed out running around the house trying to find the book, and I'm like, "How could I lose this? I'm so organized, it doesn't make sense." So I've been on Lexapro, which is a medicine that helps with anxiety, for some years now. But I would say a huge piece of my journey was also going to therapy. And I'm not someone that really thought that I needed therapy or felt like it would be beneficial for me. I talk about in the book, my friend who told me that I should go. And I was like, no, I don't think that's for me. But
right.
it got to the point where I feel like a lot of my worrying and anxiety about fears in the future were getting in the way of me being present. And, they say anxiety lives in the future, depression lives in the past, and joy lives in the present. And I was just having a really hard time being present in my own life. And so I decided to go to therapy. And at the beginning of my therapy journey, I laugh because I still have the same therapist. I actually had a session this morning.
Oh, wow. That's good.
But, I told her, I'm very self-aware. I read a lot of self-help books. I know myself. Like, I'm very logical thinker. I'm not crazy like your other patients probably are. You're not going to need to help me that much. I probably don't have that much to like talk about my past. Like, my parents are married. I have no problems. I have no trauma, which is hilarious now that I
Mm,
think about it. But I was like, I just need you to like help me with this little anxiety thing. And for anyone who ever has been to therapy, or for any people practicing mental health, you might know that that was like a very naive way of going in. I
mhm.
was very shocked at some of the stuff that came up and the things that I had to deconstruct and process during that journey, which kind of led to my book.
Yes, yes. And it's something, well, number one, I know that anxiety has increased just overall. Like the pandemic did it for a lot of people who may not have normally even experienced what that is, started to experience it during the pandemic because there's so much uncertainty. And of course, we worry about the uncertainty, and sometimes it's hard to find joy when nothing around you looks joyful. So, that's something. So you are not alone in that in and of itself. And God bless you, for going to get the help. I too am one, not so much anxiety. Admittedly, I go more to the depressive side, but I have gone to therapy as well. So you're not alone. And when we planned this, I wasn't even thinking about the fact that it's the end of Mental Health Awareness Month, but it's actually perfect to have this conversation at this particular time. But along as I was reading through your book, and it is a memoir, so even though you talk about therapy, it's really more about just your life story. And as I'm reading bits of your life story through the different segments and the different scenarios, it's like, oh, I understand why. Because we go through stuff and we might not really think much of it as we're going through it. But when you sit back and start to unpack it,
Absolutely. And I tell people I am not a mental health practitioner and by any means, and I write from the perspective of the patient, not the doctor. For several reasons. I think a lot of times in the Black community, we do have these ideas about being too blessed to be stressed if you pull in faith. A lot of us grew up very traditionally Christian, and you should just pray it away or, ask God to take it from you. And I think prayer is wonderful, medication is wonderful, but there's something about having someone that can help you look at your life and your story and just consciously be present for yourself. I think it's a lot easier to look at other people's lives. I mean, even TD Jake says we go around, we're not looking in mirrors all day, every day. So it's a lot easier to see other people's stories a lot more clearly. And sometimes you need someone to reflect you back to you, which is why
mhm.
therapy was so helpful for me. So I wanted to write from the perspective of showing people, hey, like these things that we deal with sometimes in the Black community that can feel like micro traumas or microaggressions, and they might not feel like a big trauma. And when I use the word trauma, I use it the way Dr. Anita Phillips uses it, who's an amazing pastor and mental health practitioner. But she says trauma is anything that negatively affects the way we see ourselves, God, or others around us. And when you think about it like that, those could be, very slight comments about your skin, your hair texture. It could be something you see in a music video. It could be something you notice while scrolling on the internet. And those little traumas actually can build up and affect our bodies, our cortisol levels, the way that we see ourselves, our self-esteem, the same way a big trauma, what we might consider a big trauma might. So just kind of showing how all of these little micro traumas can really affect us. And then I think also for people that are not in our communities, giving them an idea of what it is we go through on a daily basis, because I've heard so many people be like, this is 2023. Slavery doesn't exist. Civil rights is over. Like, what are you guys still complaining about?
They don't live and walk around in these bodies and experience the things that we experience. And that's what I really loved in reading your book, because it's talking about your journey, but it's kind of like a story of your family. It's your story, almost like a coming of age, so to speak, because we do start relatively young. So just, kind of give us an idea of where you start off, because I know you start off really talking about your family history and where you come from and the roots of where you come from. So just share us a little bit about what your family history is.
Yeah, so I talk a lot about my grandparents and my parents kind of at the beginning of the story. I think if for anyone that's ever been to therapy, a lot of the times, no matter what you're complaining about or venting about or crying about or happy about, even sometimes you go with joy. When you first start your sessions, they want to know about your foundation. Where did you come from? So one of the first questions tends to be something around like, tell me about your parents, or what was it like for you growing up? Who raised you? Where were you born? When's the first time you can remember X happening? And it's so easy to disconnect our past from our present, when a lot of times when you start to pay attention, you start to see common threads. And so I think being really intentional about thinking about how my grandparents were raised. My mom's family is Haitian American, and my grandparents came over not speaking really any English and not having an education, and really having to work their way up from nothing, really. And my dad's parents, who also, they lived here in the States, but were also working their way up from nothing, came from Newark, New Jersey. They didn't have a lot of money. And my, granddad was one of the first, and I think all of our families, to go to college. And what that experience is like, showing up with like 32 cents in his pocket. Although I have to admit, every time I talk to him, the number changes. He's like, I had 17 cents in my pocket. I had 6 cents in my pocket. We know it was some number of cents.
Right.
But just thinking about how much they did not have access to, and how education really provided a foundation for them to provide more for their families. And just thinking about how, as Black people, especially if you're not, like, if you're first or second generation, but I think also for people who are coming from families that made lots of sacrifices, which is a lot of our ancestors, that honestly, there can be a pressure that we put on ourselves to make those sacrifices worth it. Like, they went through X, Y, and Z so that I could do A, B, and C. So we put all this pressure on ourselves to do better and to be better. And a lot of times they say the people who are very highly achieving actually have a lot more anxiety because of the pressure themselves to do well.
I believe it, and it is true. As I was, kind of processing the book in my mind, and, thinking about my own family and how my life today looks very different from my mother's life. We talk about that sometimes. She said, oh, some of the stuff that you're doing, or, she's like, it wasn't even a thought. And it definitely wasn't for her mother. And there does become this thing where each generation wants their children to do better. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And even if they are able to do it, we don't think about the sacrifices. We don't always think about the pressure and some of the environments that we have to be in order to get to certain levels where we can, be quote unquote successful or start to build, generational wealth or, even think about stuff like that.
It's so true. And, there's this saying that I think is beautiful, right? About how we're standing on the shoulders of giants. And on one side, it can be very encouraging, but on the other side, you think about all the people you're standing on, the sacrifices you've made, and they're all looking at you, waiting for you to like make the sacrifice worth it. It can also feel like a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It can, and oftentimes it does. So, because your parents were, striving to do more, they ultimately became kind of like what we would call the Huxtables.
Yeah.
Very successful in their careers, and you watch them go through that process, and then because of the things that they were doing, it oftentimes, well, most of the time, placed you in environments where you might have been one of a couple or the only in terms of being a Black person or Black
Yeah.
child.
And I think that is something that I've now being at this age think really critically about and talk to a lot of my friends about as well. Because when you think about trying to get to, in quotation marks, the best schools and the best neighborhoods, a lot of times the way that we define those things, they tend to be predominantly white. So you end up being, like you said, one of the only Black or the token Black. And I think it's complex because I think it's beautiful to have schools that are just for Black people and to have um, like neighborhoods and events. I think like pro Black is beautiful, but at the same time, it's also great to have a Black person at a top hospital because if someone goes to said hospital, we know that the discrepancies of Black doctor, et cetera, you want to have somebody that looks like you in those spaces or the places where the decisions are being made. You think about the government. So very white body, but we want people that look like us to be representative. And so sometimes I feel like being the token Black can feel like a sacrifice. Like it might be easier, not in some ways socially, right? It might be easier to be around people that get you. And it can be really hard to be the only one. And I've really had to come to this space of balancing and not feeling like it was my job to carry the weight of like all Black people and to
Right.
be the representative because sometimes being in those spaces, especially coming from the South, whatever I say is the way that they see all Black people. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just representing myself, I'm representing my entire race. And every Black person they see and they meet before and after me will be determined by my interaction with them. So if they see me as a smart person, it's like, oh, well, maybe Black people are smarter than I thought. If they see
Mm-hmm.
me as a rude person, it's like Black women are so rude. And that's a lot of pressure.
It is a lot of pressure, and just thinking about that in school, in the workplace, we'll get into the workplace a little more here shortly, but just thinking about coming up and being in school and also just how can I put it? When you're first beginning to figure out who you are and what you are and like, for example, what's beauty, what's not beauty as a young girl, because there are certain things that are very specific to us as girls and young women. And I like the fact that your mom was like Black dolls, but just because mom said Black dolls didn't mean that certain narratives still weren't creeping their way into your world, and how that impacts or could have potentially have an impact on someone's own self-esteem when they see a certain type of beauty or you're supposed to be a certain size. Talk a little bit about that because you do get into it in the book.
Yeah, and I really do believe that society, social culture can have just as much, if not more, impact sometimes than law and policy. As as a lawyer, I obviously think the law is very important, but so often the way that we see ourselves and interact with each other is based on culture, right? Like you think about a third grader, the third grader is probably not reading the history of the United States and interacting with their friends based upon a court case that they read or a piece of legislation that was just passed. They're going to think about what they've seen in the media, what they've been exposed to, the things their families are saying at home. So even if things aren't being said out loud, if the only thing you see is and beauty looks one way, your little kid mind is like, so that must be what beautiful is. And I'd think about things like, the way that Teen Vogue used to look, although a lot of those magazines look very different now,
Yes.
thankfully.
Yes.
But the television program that we were watching, the beautiful main character was always the blonde girl. And even when there was a Black character, even if she was beautiful, Gabrielle Union tended to play this character a lot. It was like the sidekick Black friend who was a little bit sassy, maybe a little bit jealous, loyal to the main character, but we never actually got to be the main character in a lot of those mainstream films. So there was just this constant idea of, beautiful is Marcia Brady. She's
Right.
white, she's blonde, she gets all of the attention, she gets the guy. The Black girl in the story is kind of just there either for the diversity or it's like a supporting character to the white character. And it actually took a lot of talking through a lot of that to deconstruct how that was playing out in my life, the types of friendships that I was choosing, the types. I have a chapter that was, hard to write, and I thought a lot about how it would be received when I talk about my relationship with white women in
Mm.
particular and what that has looked like growing up, and just how some of those friendships I look back and I'm like, man, they were so unhealthy, partially because of the way that I was treated, but partially because of the way I let myself be treated because of the character that I thought I was supposed to be playing in their lives.
And that is something just to think, because there is, and I'm going to get the saying wrong, but the thought behind it will be accurate, that you don't have to be white to have a white supremacist point of view, and that a lot of times the things that are drilled in us, the things that we see, whether it's on television, and I've got some years on you, so if you think it was bad for you coming up, I really did not see, like we had teen and 17 when I was coming up. I did not see Black girls. Maybe by the time I got a little bit older, Whitney Houston showed up as a model in a few of the magazines as I started to really get older. But I mean, I was, well into my teen years by then, but I definitely did not see it, not reflected in things that were for me. But I think perhaps in my situation, the difference was that I was growing up around a lot of other Black people, and my mama had Essence, and we had Ebony and Jet. So I was seeing it, watching Soul Train, really giving my age, all of that. So I was seeing it, even though in broader view, it may not have been as much, but it definitely makes a difference, when you want the dolls with the straight hair, or you wonder why my hair won't be straight like that, or just certain things that we do and we don't love or appreciate our own beauty. So I love that you had someone that helped in that regard, but it still took you, being able to learn for yourself. The thing about white women, white girls, that is a tough thing.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to know who's trustworthy, why do they want to be your friend, what's really going on.
Yeah, and I found a lot of those relationships too, the things that made me uncomfortable, they were always very subtle, and I would try to explain them away. So for example, if my white friend would be like, "Oh, like you're so easy to be friends with. Like I feel like I'm blacker than you. Like I listen to more rap music than you do." And I'm
Mm,
like, "Okay, what does she mean by that? Is this a racist comment? Or is she just trying to find a way to relate to me? Like am I overthinking it? Do I need to be the Black girl that's offended by everything that the white friend says? And there are just so many comments, and then I think it gets, at least for me, I can say it got to the point where people would feel so comfortable around me that they would not necessarily forget that I'm Black, but forget that I belong to a group that when they speak about that, I'm like part of that group. So
right.
they say things around me and I'm like, oh, this is how y'all really feel. This is what you say when nobody's around because you've gotten kind of comfortable. I've heard, similarly for people that do reality TV, at the beginning you notice the cameras, but after a while you kind of forget they're there and you
Mm-hmm.
forget to put on airs. So it was that sort of thing. So I found that the longer I remained in those friendships and the more comfortable they became, then like truth started to come out about how they really felt about things and saw the world because they felt so comfortable with me. And I have one conversation in the book where, after 2020, everybody was having difficult conversations
Right.
around George Floyd, and one of my friends at the time was very confused. Like, I don't get why there's so much animosity. Like, I'm not a slave owner. Like, I don't own slaves.
Mhm.
So, like, why are you acting like I have some sort of privilege that you don't have? And like, my parents work hard. Like, I'm a hard worker, and very much centering themselves. And I started to, which I also do in the book, talk about how I started to talk about these things from a space of Black disprivilege instead of
Mhm.
white privilege, because I think the term is a great term, but it's still centering whiteness.
Yes.
So when we center the whiteness and then they bring it back and be like, well, as a white person, they feel like they're still the center of the conversation. And the reason we're bringing up white privilege in the beginning tends to get lost. So I think by learning to focus it on the Black disprivilege, like, here are the ways in which everything we do is harder because we're Black.
Right.
It wasn't giving them the opportunity to say, well, as a white person, because we're not talking about you right now.
Right. Exactly. Because that does become a problem when people want to center themselves. Well, I don't understand why you feel that I.
And I'm like, we're not talking about you. This is a
Right.
completely different conversation. We're talking about about the fact that when you went to the dentist, they were kind to you. When I went to the dentist, I had a terrible time until they found out I was an attorney. And then my white dentist said, well, you should have told me that from the beginning, as if that should have changed any of our interactions.
Right. You should have treated me with respect just as a human being who's ultimately paying your salary,
Exactly.
sir. Regardless. Yeah, that's something just to think about that and the way that those things show up. And I love the fact that you come up with that you came up with the concept, or you speak of the concept of Black disprivilege, because it is. I mean, me and you and I can walk into a place as two girlfriends and two other white girls go in, and they might get the table first, or just different things that may happen, and they might think, oh, no big deal, but sometimes it is. Or
And
they.
I think being a Black person too, I can only speak for myself. I know that I can sense if something is racially motivated. When people say, "Oh, are you sure that was about race?" Like, maybe there was something else there. I think being a person in Black skin for your entire life, you start to pick up on the nuances and the little things, what people say, but also what they don't say, the questions they ask you, the amount of interest they show, how things shift depending on what they learn about you. And so I think for me, that was always a big thing too, being in white spaces. If I did say, hey, I think this is race related, the exhaustion of having to explain, like, are you sure it was about race? Are you sure you're not just being sensitive? Maybe there was another explanation for that. It's like,
Mm,
no, 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 no. I felt it. I trust myself in this regard.
and that's the thing, you have to learn how to trust yourself. One of the other things that you talk about is dating. And I'm smiling because I know dating is something else. Now, you are a happy new mama. You're in a happy, healthy relationship. So you're
Yeah.
not dealing with that crazy anymore.
Thank goodness.
But just the thing of even aggressions or microaggressions that we may face as Black women in the romantic marketplace, for lack of a better way of putting it. And even that, all these things, and as we're talking about these things, we're talking about all the different ways that these things happen to us over and over and over. And it might be one little incident here and there, but the combination can begin to create challenges. So that's why we're kind of talking about the background, for those who are wondering, where are we going with this?
Yes, absolutely. And dating is interesting. I think the world has become increasingly more accepting of interracial relationship, and we've started to very much see a shift in who people are with. I think for a long time, partially because of the law, right? You saw white people were marrying white people, and Black people were marrying Black people, and Asian people were marrying Asian people. And now almost everyone I know, you could probably say, I know someone in an interracial relationship, or I have dated or even consider dating somebody in another race. But a lot of those experiences I had too. I talk about one particular experience where I dated a white man and went on a blind date, and it was just a terrible date from the beginning. He, very much was into all the stereotypes. There's a lot of fetishizing about how Black women are so wild, and he loves Black women because they have attitudes like Obama, and how Michelle had so much attitude, and just pretty much every stereotype you could think of about being a Black woman. And if the food wasn't so good, I probably would have been out of there pretty quickly. But I was like, you know what? This is a free meal. Let me just let this man talk and finish my meal and get out of here. Uh,
Right.
but even working through coming up and asking really hard questions about who I was attracted to and
Right.
why. Like, and it can get very sensitive right now by having those conversations. Like, I do believe that love is love, and
Mhm.
you can't help the skin of the other person that you fall in love with. But I also think that there are a lot of influences that tell us what's beautiful and what's not beautiful, and what's attractive and what's not attractive. And it is possible to look outside of your race because you don't love yourself and because you don't love your race. And for Black women, I think there tends to be an extra layer of stress in that scene, because it can sometimes feel that in the dating space, even if you are trying to date another Black man, that their expectations to be not as Black in order to be attractive, whether that's the way that you talk or the stereotypes Black women get about, like, oh, I've heard got Black guys, I don't want to date Black women because they have like way too much attitude, and
Mhm.
they're always trying to tell me what to do. And white women are just so much more docile and easier to get along with. Or the hair thing. I've heard Black guys be like, I don't want to date white women because they wear bonnets to bed. I don't want to wake up next to an Aunt Jemima in a bonnet.
You
And just
stop.
things that you hear from, even people that look like us, about what it means to be a Black woman, and how that can really, for a young person growing
Yes.
up, affect their self-esteem.
Hmm. Yes, at any age, really, to hear those things, and then all the stuff that we hear, and you talk about it a little bit in the book. Like if you try to go on some of the dating apps, and who's getting chosen versus who isn't being chosen, and things like that, that really can mess with your self esteem, because you have done, you're absolutely beautiful. You've done all the quote unquote right things in terms of education and all these sorts of things, and have a good career, and then you hear you get beat up on for that. So it's
I
like,
was
yeah.
just talking to my therapist this morning, so I'm still in therapy. I will probably be in therapy forever as I need it, about how Black educated women are the least likely to marry. And part of that might be by choice, but we know, like I talk about in the book, from statistics, that when you look at the dating apps, Black women are usually at the bottom of the totem pole. They're the least desired, which is really hurtful. And it makes sense as to why people feel like they have to be more white presenting or to fit in more to become more attractive. I actually had a friend who was Black that told one of our other friends, like, if you straighten your hair and get a weave and, do all this other stuff for your dating app pictures, you're probably going to get a lot more prospects than like wearing your hair natural, how you have been. And what was sad about it is that she might be right. Like, that might actually be the case. But the fact that we even have to consider that, I think, is really sad. And I do all the hair things. Still
Right.
love straight hair, still love weave. I love pieces. I wear my hair natural. I wear it in braids. And I think that's part of the beauty of being Black. But feeling like
Absolutely.
we don't have the freedom to show up that God created us in order to be desirable, that's really tough.
It is. It is. And to think that others can mimic, and they're seen as something that we are not, when they're mimicking us, whether it's these or bodies going and buying them versus having them naturally.
100%. And I actually, uh, had a long conversation with one of my white blonde friends about braids, because she got braids once. And she went out and somebody told her, like, you don't need to be wearing those braids. And she was so hurt. She came
Mhm.
back and she's like, Kiki, like, I'm a good person. Like, I love Black people. Like, I don't know why someone would say this. And I do also talk about in the book, a lot of times I feel like sometimes white people tend to hyper personalize issues. Like,
Mhm.
instead of looking at the issue, they make it very personal to themselves. They want to give you an entire resume of everything they've ever done that's right. And I'm like, That's not the issue. And at least for me, I can't speak for everyone. It's not that I have the issue with someone who's white potentially wearing braids. It's that in society, we see like a Kardashian wear braids and they're put on the cover of Vogue magazine as being super high fashion. But as a Black person, it's ghetto. I told you I just saw a tweet today. Black Twitter was talking about this woman who said, if you want to be successful dating in LA, like take out the passion twists. And I didn't even know that was a thing. She's like, you have to know your crowd. Like, y'all aren't getting dates because you're wearing those passion twists. And that's coming from another Black person. So the frustration that I could be seen as not desirable on our bodies, but desirable in somebody else, like that's annoying.
And all of that stuff. Yes. Last thing I want to talk about right now, because it's already 8:36, believe it or not, before we get into the process, the healing process, I have to talk about work. Because work, Lord have mercy. Especially, someone like you who is a lawyer by trade and has gone, worked in a lot of environments where, are predominantly white and male. You aren't seeing a lot of people that look like you. And we oftentimes, as, whether you're a quote unquote professional woman or, or not, there are oftentimes aggressions or microaggressions that we experience in the workplace. So just talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I think the first thing, I really hate that it makes a difference when people know that I'm an attorney. I hate that I've even had to use that in the past as a means of telling someone because I think that that'll make them respect me more because we're deserving of respect no matter what our professions are. But the fact that there are so few Black attorneys, especially Black female attorneys, and less than 5%, I think I read most recently, of attorneys are Black. Even in the workspace, my coworkers, when I first start a job, the other people in the office who you haven't met yet, not the team, they tend to assume that I'm something else, right? Like I don't think I've ever started a job where people have treated me or assumed that I was an attorney. And I see the difference when other, white coworkers start. If I have a white male, it's coming from a law firm. I see the respect that people give him automatically versus the types of things that people would say to me. I think what's interesting and what I share in the book is that in the workspace, those have been things that I've experienced not just through nuance, but people will actually vocalize to me like, wow, you're an attorney? Like, I'm shocked. I'm surprised. I talk about one person in the book who we worked literally right across from each other. Like her office and where I sat was literally like I saw her every single day come in. She saw me come in. We didn't talk for like months. And then I guess she heard me one day negotiating a call and came out and was like, oh my gosh, like, wait a second. I like heard you on the phone and I didn't realize that you were an attorney.
Wow.
Like you sound so smart on the phone. That's what she told me. She said it as if she was surprised. She's like, you like sound like you really know what you're doing. And I'm like, I do know what I'm doing.
Wow.
She asked me where I went to law school and I told her and she was like, that's like a law school. That law school is even better than the school I went to again.
Exactly.
And then vocalizes, I know I shouldn't be shocked, but like, wow, is it bad that you just became so much more interesting to me? And just having her vocalize that out loud, like those are the things that we often feel when people respond to us. But the fact that she said it out loud, there's a part of me that was glad because I was like, oh, I'm not crazy. This is really how people think and really how people feel, and how our relationship was completely different moving forward because she felt like you're one of the smart ones. But going into a workspace having to prove that we're smart or that we're capable or that we weren't just a diversity hire and all of those other things, it adds so much stress to the job on top of the stress from just doing the job in the first place.
On top of the stress of just being a Black person in America, because as you were talking, I'm just thinking about situations, presently I work for an organization where it's all Black women and it's beautiful. And we all work remotely. So even we don't get to get on each other's nerves because we're all remote.
Love that.
But it's one of those things that gosh, things that people would say to you, or the fact that I can think very distinctively for an experience that I had being at work, and it was right after the whole situation with Sandra Bland, right? And of course, we were upset and trying to figure out what happened, her in the prison and everything. And I was at work, and it was in my mind because she was actually a member of my sorority. I'm Sigma Gamma Rho. She was a member of the sorority and all of that. So, and there were other like less than 6 degrees of separation. So, of course, when that stuff happens, it's top of mind. And something came on the radio station that was playing, and some of the white ladies made a comment almost implying that, oh, well, didn't anything really happen to her? Her family's just trying to get money. And I'm like, say what? And knowing that I really can't say what I want to say. So I'm dealing with the stress of the job, whatever the stress is, and then I got to deal with that too. And you want to cuss them out, but you probably shouldn't. So yeah, it can be rough,
Hearing you say that, I remember I had a Black coworker talk to me about that very thing, and what's appropriate to complain about at work and what's not appropriate. And she said, growing up, and she's probably around your age, she's like, I learned that the squeaky white wheel gets oiled, but the squeaky black wheel gets replaced. Mm-hmm. So, as a white person, you can complain about things and maybe people will listen to you and they might even understand your perspective. But as a Black person, it's like, here goes the angry Black person again. We'd rather not have to deal with that.
Exactly. So, and those are the kinds of things that do weigh on you, because you have your own feelings anyway, just of dealing with that, or during, 2020 with George Floyd and all of that, something similar, maybe it wasn't the words, but, and then I'm gonna move on. But since we're talking about it, I just have to say it, like during the George Floyd situation in the summer, and people were like, oh, well, we need to do this, that, and the other to protect the building that we own. And it's like, well, what about what happened to the people? You're worried about protecting the building, but you never said no statements, no nothing, no anything to try to speak to what a predominantly Black staff might have been going through. But you're hiring guards to protect the building.
It's infuriating.
You don't think
that level of exhaustion, I know in 2020, it was coming from there, right? Like the people who just didn't get it. But then I talk about in the book the exhaustion from the people who wanted to be good allies and they wanted to show up, but they were going to their one Black friend or their one Black coworker to figure out how. So I, was getting texts about, I want to be a good ally. What do you think I should do? How should we approach this at work, or being at work? And they'd run things by me like, we're going to send out a statement to the company. Can you read this to tell us what you think? And so it's like on top of doing your job, you also become like the diversity consultant simply by being a Black person. And that can be exhausting. It got to the point where now when people do that, I'm like, I wrote a book about what it's like to be Black. So here, you can just like read this.
Right.
And it's beautiful to have those conversations and tell to the extent that you have the energy. But I found that I was just often very depleted at the end of the day, having so many conversations with white people about why Black people are mad and what the Black perspective is and what it is that we go through on a daily basis. I'm like, I don't have time to have this hour conversation with every single white person I know.
Right. So with all of that, let's talk about your healing process. So was it anything in particular that made you decide? I know one of your friends mentioned to you, doing therapy, but was it any one particular thing, or just all of those things together? You say, hey, I'm tired of this. I need some help to kind of navigate some of the things that I've been experiencing, even going back to childhood.
Yeah. And to even that point that you said, like, I don't think that there was a conscious connection between the anxiety that I was feeling and all the things I've been experiencing going back to childhood. I like to think about myself as someone who loves to solve problems. So I thought I'm an anxious person, which I don't say now because I'm not an anxious person. I'm just a person who gets anxious.
Right.
I'm an anxious person. I want to fix it. What can I do? And there are a lot of self-help tools out there, right? Like take time, take a long shower, take a walk, light a candle. People use crystals, go to church, pray about it, take time in the morning to have like breakfast and coffee. And there's just a whole list of things, self-care things that people do to feel better. And I think all of those things are great. But I think I had just gotten to the point where I tried all the things and none of it seemed like it was working. So that's when I was like, okay, maybe I'm addressing the consequence of the anxiety. Like I'm feeling anxious, maybe a bubble bath, I might feel better for like 20 minutes and I'm anxious again. Or maybe I felt better for that day. So I'm trying to fix the problem, but like, what's the root of the problem? Like,
Right.
where does it come from? So I think going to therapy allowed me to really get to the root of the problem. So instead of trying to fix it top down, I could kind of go to the bottom and work from there.
That's good. That's powerful. And I'm glad that you were able, to do that, and had the resources available and all of that, and had the opportunity, to be working and to be a work in progress, because the reality of it is, once you start that, it continues. And I know that, layers get deeper and deeper and deeper. And like you said, you're still in therapy, that's a good thing, because it's going to help you to continue to grow, continue to get better, and to be able to deal with those things and get to the root and not just deal with the fruit. Because,
Exactly.
yeah.
And I tell people too, you don't have to wait until you hit rock bottom. Like I go now just kind of like maintenance. Like I put moisturizer on every day, not because my skin is super dry at that moment, but I know by putting the moisturizer on every day, I can keep it supple and I won't get to the point where it's like super dry. And now sometimes like people ask me like, oh, you feel like you still need to go? I'm like, I like to think about it as maintenance. I haven't really hit a rock bottom in a long time. Thank you, Jesus.
Yes.
But I think part of that is doing the work. It's like, no, you're consciously and constantly working through your life and changes and the things that come up so they don't have an opportunity to take root, grow trees, and grow into something else. Like you're addressing it at the beginning.
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense, to keep that process going, because your life is changing. Your life, and now we're gonna segue. Your life has changed recently. That you are a new mom. We mentioned that earlier. So that's the thing. And I guess maybe continuing in your therapy, because there are some women who deal with like postpartum depression and different things like that. So having somebody on speed dial, if you're feeling, whatever it is you're feeling, is definitely beneficial. But how does it feel being a new mommy?
Really great, and I'm very blessed in that I haven't had any sort of postpartum depression, thank goodness. I also chose to stay on my anxiety medication, Lexapro, through my pregnancy and have continued to stay on it now. And I got clearance from the doctor that it was 100% safe, and I think it was a decision I made just talking to my therapist about it. Like, anxiety, adding a whole bunch of anxiety to a time that could already be very like anxiety producing because it's so new, it might not be the best time to try to like get off of everything now. So I'm really honest in like telling people that. I have like no shame, like, yeah, I stayed on it. I Who knows, maybe I'll be on it forever, maybe at some point I'll try to wean myself off of it. But I think I that was a really big choice for me. But it does make me think really critically about just a lot of the themes and things that I write about in the book. You know, I write from the perspective of a Black woman, but now I have a son, and
Mm-hmm.
raising a Black son and thinking
Mm-hmm.
about a lot of the issues that he'll face as a Black man in America. And sometimes that is in and of itself, thinking about the possibilities can be very anxiety producing.
Mm-hmm. That's true. We think about our sons, husbands, fathers, boyfriends, whatever, the men in our lives, but then also remembering us as well, because we are not, we can also, when you talk about, I'm thinking about one incident in particular, I'm not going to get into it right now, but we can be targets at different times, just as Black women, that people will try to come after us in ways that we might traditionally think that our men are going through, but we can go through things as well. So it's important to do that. But I'm so happy because when we first connected back in December, I don't even know if I knew you were pregnant then. But, you know, when I found out you were, I'm like, oh, wow, she's going to have a baby before she gets a chance to come talk to me.
Which is really crazy. I have a chapter in the book talking about a terrible medical situation that I had with a very negligent doctor, and I don't use that word loosely. And long story short, because of the way that I was treated, or I should say the lack of treatment, I had doctors tell me it might be hard for you to have kids. Like you don't know, it could affect your fertility. And I know that that is something that it's a whole different conversation about Black women and maternal death rates and infertility, and there's a lot there as well. So being able to look back on that and be like, wow, like I'm really blessed and grateful that not only was I able to, you know, conceive, but I also had a healthy child. And I was like convinced while I had to have the C-section because I had some medical issues. I was convinced that I like might not make it out alive, which I'm sure that there's a fear that a lot of women have going into childbirth. But I felt like every time I turned on the news or every time I looked at something, it was a story about another Black woman who died in labor or almost died in labor. And Serena Williams told her story. We had women from people across the socioeconomic status, from super, super famous to not well known at all. And that's another stress that I think, you know, Black women are dealing with now too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if for those of you all who might be watching for the first time, I know there's someone here named Imani who said she was watching for the first time, probably about a little less than a month ago. I had a conversation with Dr. Monique Rainford, who wrote the book Pregnant While Black, which talks about a lot of those things. So if you are watching on YouTube, or if you go to the Brown Girl Collective YouTube and you want to learn more specifically about Black maternal health, I would suggest that you watch that show because you can just learn a lot, just to know some of the things that Black mothers are, you know, want to be mothers are dealing with. So just, you know, watch that because it was really good information in there. But for you personally, now that you have your baby, some of your work has shifted a little bit. You have started Diapers and Dollars. So what's that all about?
Yeah, so my blog has shifted. It's funny, so the week my book baby came out, my book, that was the week I found out I was pregnant.
Right.
So it was like, yeah, baby number one. And then I was like, oh, I'm having baby number two. And a lot of my focus, I think, is obviously now just being a new mom and having this new experience has kind of been in that space. And I'm really excited about the blog. It's really just stories from my life, kind of like I do in the book, and also have guest posts as well. But what it's like to be somebody who is still in the space of trying to like work and make money and be an entrepreneur and balancing to be a mother on the other side of that. I've found that being a new mom community has been the most incredibly helpful thing. I think community has always been important, but I've relied so heavily on my community because there's so much we're not taught and we don't learn about having children and just women's issues in general. Like I was shocked. I thought I knew a lot more about pregnancy and birth and child rearing than I actually did. Like I didn't realize I was going to have like a 6-week recovery process after my C-section. I didn't know that trying to go to the bathroom for the first time was going to be painful. There was just like so much stuff I didn't know.
Right.
So trying to create a space of community for people to, you know, deal with those issues.
Then that's good that you're doing that, and you definitely have the skill, you know, the skills to pay the bills, as you say. You know, with your writing skills and all of that. One of your other projects that I am really interested in is Like You, which is I'll let you tell us what Like You is about, because there are some cards that people can go and look for in stores.
Yes. So Like You, we started Like You kind of as a social movement tied to product to really help bring people together, very much motivated by 2020 and seeing how people were feeling very isolated, not just because of the hard social political conversations we were having, but also because we were in the middle of a pandemic and people were lonely. And I read a recent statistic about how so many young people, their depression is tied to loneliness for a lot of people. So we wanted to really create products to like bring people and create some type of community. I was just talking about that, as a new mom, how community is helpful. But no matter what stage of life you're in or what you're dealing with, I think it's really important to have community. And how do you do that if you are having trouble connecting with people? So like you cards, they're question cards that are put together to help you consciously really get to know the people in your lives. And I play still like with my family, with my friends, with my romantic partners, because I think especially in those relationships, you feel like you really know the person, and we forget that we're constantly evolving and changing, and it's a constant process of getting to re-know a person. I would say I'm a completely different person than I was last year. So even every time I play with my partner, our answers are different. Like when one of our questions, when's the last time you cried? That question is different every single time I play. But it's kind of divided into lighthearted questions and deeper questions. So you can get the game at Target. They're also available at Kohl's as of last month, which is exciting. And then we have 2 new games that we're bringing to the market very soon. One is specifically for parents and teenagers to talk about hard issues, because so many of the parents I hear say that their kids are like really hard to talk to. You ask your teenager, how's your day? Fine. What'd you do at school? Same stuff. And we wanted to kind of create a way for parents to get into their kids' world. And then another one for parents and their little kids. So to be able to talk about some of the stuff that might be awkward or weird that you want to talk to your child about, it kind of opens up a conversation and gives you permission to do that.
Yeah, I love it because I wanted to make sure I brought those up because even though, you came primarily to talk about the book, that work to me is an extension of what you wrote about in the book. That's how I see it. Because, a lot of times there are questions that don't get asked. Because I was at my big age. There are questions that sometimes, my mother and I will engage in that we wouldn't have even thought about that when we were younger. When she was younger and I was younger, because you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of times people operate from the space of what they've always known or what they've always seen. And they don't know that you can do something different or you can approach things differently. So I love the concept of the like you cards because it gives people a chance to have those conversations. And by you, making them for younger people as well. Maybe there are things that, if it comes up in a game, it could be the thing that sparks a family to say, maybe we need to dive a little deeper into this. Or maybe we need.
Or even playing with my mom and her talking to my sister and I about menopause. Like I knew, again, something that I thought that I kind of understood. And now that she's kind of going through it, I understand on a completely different level. There's so much I didn't know and so much that we just don't share and don't talk about.
Right. But to be able to sit down and ask the hard questions and get heart answers, I think is very important. So I want to thank you again. I really appreciate you being here. As I said, it was in December when you got that Winter Circle Award, and everybody, I was excited for you. Your family was excited for you. And I knew that I wanted to have a chance to talk to you about the book because it's just important. It's important for us to be able, as Black women, to tell our stories, and Black women of all ages. You don't have to get to be 60, 65, 70 to have a story. If you're here and you're walking on this earth, you've got a story to tell. And it's important that we not only give people space to tell their stories, but that we actively listen to what they're saying, and that we can be, better as sisters and be better support to one another. Oh, there is one thing I forgot. Do you have it for me?
Oh, my book?
Yes, because there was a little piece that I wanted you to take a moment to read, if you don't mind.
Yes.
And there are 50 chapters in the book. Most of them are relatively short, but the very last one I wanted Kiara to share with us, because a lot of people will ask me sometimes, why is it Brown Girl Collective? We're grown women. I'm like, but inside of us, there is a little girl. And I think it's important to speak to that little girl and to minister to and love on that little girl from time to time. So that's exactly what she does in the last blurb of her book. I'm going to pull my face off the screen so you can look at her, and she's going to share with us.
So The last chapter of my book, it's a letter to my 5-year-old self because I do think that the little kid in all of us stays with us as we go through adulthood. Dear 5-year-old me, I'm writing to you from a future space and time. I'm years older than you, and time has taught me several lessons that I want to share with you. I believe they will help you live a life happier and more purpose driven. You don't know me yet, but one day I will be your safest space. I won't ever replace the role of your parents in your life, but I will be the person you come to most often when you're looking for answers. You will trust me with your fears and tell me all the secrets you can't tell anyone else. First, I want you to know how deeply you are loved. God loves you so much. Even when you feel like you're all alone, He is with you. You may not always feel like God is listening or working for your good, but pray anyway. Pray even when you feel like you've come to the end of yourself. I believe that sometimes God is just giving you what you would give yourself if you knew what He knew. I want you to look at yourself in the mirror every morning and tell yourself that you are not only loved, but you are beautiful. I want you to believe it. Don't hide who God created you to be. Hold your head high and wear your black skin with pride. You may not appreciate it now, but one day people will pay for lips, hips, and skin that look like yours. I want you to know that your voice matters just as much as anyone else's. Use it boldly and use it often. Know that you possess the same gifts and capabilities that you admire in others. Anything you desire in this world can be yours if you're willing to put in the work. You are your own biggest cheerleader. Sometimes you will win and no one will be around to clap for you. Learn to clap for yourself. Celebrate every win, even if it feels small or insignificant. You will learn even more from your failures and from your wins. So clap for yourself when you fail too. Even though things won't always work out the way you want them to, try your best to appreciate your process. Process is the garden where all beautiful things grow. The world can be a cruel place, but don't ever forget to lead with love. Your intellect and your wit will be your weapons, but your heart will be your North Star. When you're feeling lost, trust your heart to lead you back to yourself. Love is the most beautiful thing that anyone can experience in this life. You don't have to go looking for it, it will find you. Your only job is to tend to it. Water it with kindness, patience, and humility. If you stop working to keep it alive, it will die. Remember that you have no control over anything in this world but yourself. The sooner you accept this reality, the better. To love someone, to truly love someone, is to allow them to come just as they are. Don't try to change them. If they truly love you, they won't try to change you either. Be willing to suffer for things that you love, but remember that you don't have to light yourself on fire to keep anyone warm. You are the fire. You burn with passion and joy and hope. You are the light this world needs. Never dim your light or shrink yourself to make anyone else feel more comfortable. You never have to apologize for taking up space. Everywhere you are supposed to be. One day you will try to imagine a world without yourself in it, and you will cry. You will know then that you don't just exist, you belong. No is a complete sentence, and you are allowed to say no at any time to anyone. You can say no to jobs, to sex, to pastors, to uncomfortable requests. No never requires an explanation. There is no greater gift you can give the world than your story. You must fight to tell it no matter what. Not every piece of your story will unfold pleasantly, but all the unfolding will lead to growing, and growing is living. As we grow, we become more equipped to show up as healthier, more healed versions of ourselves, and the world benefits from that. I want you to know that you can trust yourself. Your life belongs to you, and you get to decide how to live it. People will try to advise you at every turn, but no one knows you better than you know yourself. Trust your instincts. Leap with conviction and walk boldly through every door you choose to open. I know that you worry. You worry you won't figure it out, but you don't have to have all the answers. You just have to keep asking yourself the right questions. One day, it will all settle in your soul and you will smile.
Yes. Thank you. That's a perfect ending for today. I really do appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time to read that. It meant a lot to me to hear you read it out loud, just as it did when I read it in the book, and I'm sure that it will mean a lot to others as well. So I'm giving everybody homework. Sit down and write a letter to your 5-year-old self. I just think it's a good exercise because a lot of times, we don't love on and nurture that little girl, and we can always find fault and things about ourselves, but to give ourselves grace, just like you would that little 5-year-old girl inside of you. So Thank you, Kiara. I want you to just hold on for a second. I'm going to take you off screen, but don't hang up. So I'm just going to say goodbye to everybody else. And then, I'll come and say a proper goodbye to you. But thank you again for your time. I do appreciate you again. And hopefully this won't be the last time. So I'm sure you've got another book in you when you can settle your life, because you got a lot going on right now.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yes, absolutely. So hold on one second, but don't go away. Yes, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and joining us. As I said, it was indeed a pleasure to have an opportunity to have Kiara on. Yes, many thanks, much love. Yes, it's a pleasure to have her here because, as I mentioned several times, I've been following her work for a while. We gave her an award back in December, and she had a baby and all that in between. So now she had the opportunity to come and chat with us, and I really do appreciate that. So most of the time, I have a picture of what's coming next. I don't have a picture, but I can at least share it with you. Next week, we will have with us Sarah Elise, who will be here to talk about her book, A Recipe for More, Ingredients for a Life of Abundance and Ease. So be on the lookout for that next week, same time, 8 o'clock Eastern time, here on the Brown Girl Collective Facebook page, YouTube channel, and actually it is also streaming on Twitter. So be on the lookout for that coming next Wednesday. So we're going to talk about a recipe for more. So I hope y'all know how to follow recipes, because some of y'all don't. But yes, a recipe for more is what we'll be talking about next week. So until then, everyone, please have a good evening, good morning, or afternoon, depending on when you're watching, if you're catching it on a rebroadcast. And we just thank you for your time and your energy, your loving energy in this space. And we look forward to seeing you again real soon. And until that time, please continue to live well. Take care. Bye-bye.